Yet more domestic targets to discuss, with a Premier League midfielder on the radar, a free agent striker possibility, and Crystal Palace have laid their post-Marc Guehi plans out. Let's get into it. Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thanks so much to everybody who wished me happy birthday yesterday and also has subscribed and commented and liked on the first episode of NUFC Transfer Daily this week. So hit like on this video and hit subscribe as well if you haven't, and if you're new, plenty more to discuss. Everything seems to be starting to heat up a little bit, but we're going to start with Jacob Ramsey from Aston Villa. £30 million deal is apparently on the table, according to the journalist Sasha Tavalieri from Sky Switzerland. This is not a surprise. Eddie Howe is a huge fan of Jacob Ramsey. He's a huge fan of the sort of lung-busting, powerful, driving forward number 8, as we've seen with Joe Willock and Joe Linton over the last couple of years. And Ramsey would be, I think, basically an upgrade on Joe Willock in terms of the fact that he's a year younger. He's been a huge impact player for Villa. Still struggles with injuries. I think that's natural for the type of player you are when you're sort of rangy and agile. Seeing that with Joe Willock, muscle injuries are sort of very common. But for me, he is an upgrade on Willock, and that would be where he would stand. This is a deal that's potentially possible because of PSR. This is the sort of point that the article that was written is making, that Villa are the team most known to need to sell before the end of June. And Newcastle have got a long-standing interest in Ramsey. And also Villa are probably more likely to want to lose him than, say, Watkins or Morgan Rogers has been consistently talked about. But I think, he's their version of Isak. They're going to do everything they can to keep him and a couple of others as well. From their perspective, Ramsey kind of feels like a lesser evil to sort of let go because of the fact that he's pure profit as well. He's homegrown, that's a huge thing. He's not been a first-team player because of injuries potentially, but because Yuri Tillemans has been in there, Boubacar Kamara has been in there as well. There's these players who I think are ahead of him in the pecking order for Unai Emery. So this is a deal that could potentially be done, and I see him very much as a replacement for Willock. I think Willock's got interest from Fulham and Crystal Palace. I think that's been well documented. I chased up the Crystal Palace links last week. They are definitely true. He is very much of interest to them. I haven't chased the Fulham ones, but they are well documented in terms of links. But yeah, this is a deal that I think would happen as a sort of straight swap in the squad, if you like. Player that sort of raises the base rather than raises the ceiling, in my mind. But he's a very, very good player. I really like him. Very similar to Willock in terms of getting forward, but I think he's much more tactically intelligent in terms of when he arrives in the area. I always remember the game between Newcastle and Aston Villa a couple of years ago when him and Watkins really tore Newcastle apart at Villa Park. It was the first time that season they'd been really beaten heavily. A real warning sign of what Villa were coming to be under Unai Emery, and they were really fast, ferocious and powerful, and that stemmed from Jacob Ramsey in the midfield. So this would be a really interesting signing if it could happen. £30 million by the sounds of it is the fee, and it would make sense on all sides, I think, especially if Willock then leaves for around £25 million. You're paying £5 million extra for a decent upgrade, a player who's a year younger. Even though he's had injury problems, he's much more reliable in that sense, because we've seen in the last couple of years, really, Willock had a season where he wasn't fit, and then a season where he's come into the team and not found his level because he hasn't got the match fitness and the confidence up to do that. So it might be the time to do this deal. Let me know in the comment section below what you think, but this does feel like it could possibly happen. This is the one I think, when people have spoken about possible PSR deals with teams that need to sell, yes, there's been dreams of Morgan Rogers, but from a Newcastle perspective, this one's always felt like the most possible because there's a long-term interest, the fact that he's homegrown, and also he's not been a first-team player in terms of the strongest team that Unai Emery's played. But he's certainly, I think this is the reason why Villa have been such a threat to Newcastle. I don't think they have many players who are better than Newcastle's best in terms of, do they have anybody who's on the level of Tonali or Isak or Bruno or Botman? The gap between their top and their bottom is much stronger than Newcastle's, and I think that showed when the two teams met back in April and they won 4-1, and a lot of that sort of came from the bench. So Ramsey would be a huge upgrade on Willock, which is a good deal to do in my opinion, and I think that this one could happen. Next we're going to talk about Dominic Calvert-Lewin. A couple of weeks away from leaving Everton. He'll be a free agent, 28 years old, very highly rated by Eddie Howe. Obviously there was lots of links with Newcastle last year when they were talking about a possible PSR deal over Calvert-Lewin coming in, Yankuba Minter going the other way. That didn't end up happening, but he does feel like a possibility, especially if you're talking about replacing Callum Wilson, specifically because he's 5 years younger than Wilson. He does have injury problems like Wilson as well, and he's obviously had issues with that, but physically he fits the bill. He was on the High Performance podcast with Jake Humphries talking about the fact that he wants Champions League football, he wants to win. I think he'd be very interested in a move to Newcastle. Whether Newcastle will go in for him, it remains to be seen, but I think for me, he feels like the type of player that Newcastle will look at. Whether he'd be the backup striker to Alexander Isak, not sure, because obviously there's lots of links with João Pedro. To me, Calvert-Lewin should only come in as cover. I think Newcastle would still need a quality addition in attack behind Isak, because the drop-off would be huge. I mean, he's only scored a handful of goals, 3 last season, 7 the season before, 2, 5, then 16 and 13. That isn't the sort of level of striker that Newcastle need. He's 28, he's not going to get any better. Physically, he does replace Wilson in a good way. He very much feels like a direct Wilson replacement in many ways. It would make sense if the wage packet was fairly small and he came in to play a bit part role, but I'm sure he wants to play football as well. So this one isn't one for me, but I can certainly see Eddie Howe pushing for this one, because of the fact that he has been a huge fan. He likes him. He's liked him for a long time. There was serious interest in him dating back to the very start of the takeover when Newcastle were looking at strikers. So this one could very much happen, I think, especially now he's about to leave Everton. He would certainly be interested by the sounds of it. If Newcastle were to sign him, they'd also need to sign somebody else as well, and crucially not sign Wilson to a new contract, because that is also ongoing as well. So we'll see how this plays out. But Calvert-Lewin on a free transfer, let me know in the comment section what you think. And the final thing we're going to talk about is Marc Guehi at Crystal Palace. The situation is moving on from the Palace perspective. Obviously, they've got lots of questions about whether they're going to be in Europe next season. It would be ridiculous, in my opinion, if Crystal Palace don't play in Europe next season. But they are apparently making plans post Marc Guehi, if he is to leave this summer. With a year on his contract, his valuation is nowhere near what it was last season. I think Newcastle will maybe look to do a deal at £35-40 million. But Crystal Palace have apparently earmarked Usuzman Diamande as a potential replacement. 21 years old, Sporting Lisbon defender. He, as many people who've watched this channel for a long time will know, is my preferred centre-back from abroad. He's 21, he's got a massively high ceiling, Champions League experience, very, very calm on the ball with both feet, fleet of foot, very quick, very tall, physically imposing. He'd be my sort of signing. So depending on the deal, I think Crystal Palace might be actually doing well here out of this. And I think for me, it's something that Newcastle should certainly consider as well. And all the rumours are pointing towards domestic targets. And again, I'll refer back to my comments at the start of yesterday's video. If Newcastle are interested in domestic targets, then they've got to get ready for high prices and difficult negotiations. We've already know what Newcastle have been through with Guehi last summer and Steve Parish. You would imagine it's going to be a bit easier this time, but at the same time, I think Palace will want the most that they can get out of him. All of these players who have been linked as major signings, so not talking about Ramsey, not necessarily talking about Calvert-Lewin here, but the big inquiries made for João Pedro, Anthony Elanga, Marc Guehi, obviously, from last summer, they all improve the squad. It's just about the value, it's just about the opportunity, and I think Diamande would be a massive, massive replacement for him. They already have Maxence Lacroix from last season, when he joined from Wolfsburg and looked really good. He was an excellent signing for about £12 million. It shows again about the value of the European market, which I'll not stop talking about, because it really does feel like a juxtaposition for me that Newcastle are not wanting to be priced out of deals, not wanting to deal with difficult clubs and all that sort of thing, but they're only shopping in the Premier League market. If that's the case, then I don't fully understand it. But let me know in the comment section below on all three of the things that we've spoken about, particularly Calvert-Lewin. Do you think he would be a good signing? Jacob Ramsey could potentially come in from Aston Villa as a PSR deal. That would make a lot of sense in my opinion. And also the Marc Guehi situation. No news on whether Newcastle are going to make a bid, but he's certainly on the list, and they certainly do like him. Obviously, we know that Newcastle have made play for long-term targets in the past. Thanks so much for joining me again. Like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of NUFC Transfer Daily. I'll catch you then. Cheers.